Hey there, Sky Soldier here. In this video I'm going to be going over 5 Elden Ring Beginner tips, and this is the Combat Edition. Spoiler warning, this video contains spoilers in the form of weapons, armor, and abilities from early to mid and even late game. With that out of the way, these tips are here to help beginners with combat basics and get them more familiar with combat in the lands between. The combat tutorials at the beginning of the game are unhelpful and also very basic. Hopefully, this can shine some light on some simple combat strategies to get you started by just taking them a little further than the game's tutorials do. I'm going to preface this section with a piece of advice for newer players. The Elden Ring and Dark Souls communities on public social media platforms such as Reddit and the official Elden Ring forums are notorious for giving players trouble for making the game too easy on themselves. I see people who post on Reddit asking for advice only for players to tell them to get good, and I can't abide that. That's a great way to deter players from coming to the Lands Between and playing Elden Ring. Play with other people, play with whatever weapon, sorcery, incantation, Ash of War, summon, or cheesy strategy that you want, and don't let other people deter you from that. Don't feel guilty about not playing the game naked at rune level 1. Elden Ring is about discovery and having fun, and if you take some of your options away because of someone else's feelings on it, then you aren't really giving yourself a fair shot at having fun in the Lands Between. The tip I want to talk about first is making Elden Ring a lot more fun by choosing the right weapon. Combat can be one of the most challenging and rewarding things in Elden Ring, and with the right ability or weapon, it can feel amazing. However, if you end up with a weapon or sorceries you don't like, it can be one of the things that turns players off the quickest when it comes to Elden Ring. Most of the time, players build their stats toward a specific ability or weapon, whether that's a weapon's Ash of War, sorcery, incantation, or even sometimes they build for a specific moveset on a weapon, as some of the same types of weapons can have very different movesets, or some weapons' movesets lend themselves to certain styles of play, like curved swords for instance attack very rapidly, do decent damage, and apply status effects very well. It's okay to experiment with different weapons at the beginning of the game until you find a moveset you like. Then begin upgrading your weapon with either smithing stones or somber smithing stones. At the beginning of the game, you have a limited number of these materials, so focusing on one weapon or a pair of weapons is usually the way to go, and it can deter people from experimenting with different weapons because of the fear of not being able to upgrade a weapon when they find it when they run out of smithing stones or somber smithing stones. However, later on, after finding specific items in the form of bell bearings, you can purchase an infinite number of the various smithing and somber smithing stones except for the most rare ones. That being said, at the beginning of the game and for the first few hours, not upgrading your weapon is perfectly fine if you want to save your smithing stones before something you really like. The second thing you need to decide is whether you want to fight in melee or ranged combat. Choosing whether or not to fight up close can be your first challenge all on its own. Personally, I usually make a build around a weapon and a spell combo, so I have both, or I go with a weapon that has a ranged Ash of War. Some enemies can be a lot harder to try and fight in melee, and the same goes for ranged. Although I will say ranged-based characters have a little easier time than melee in most cases, in my opinion. In most cases, it helps to have a melee, a ranged, and AoE options, so you have something for every scenario. That said, it's possible to beat the game with only melee, and it's possible to beat the game with only ranged attacks. Pick what's most comfortable for you. In melee, you have light attacks, heavy attacks, charged heavy attacks, rolling attacks, crouching attacks, jump attacks, critical attacks, lunge attacks, running attacks, and Ashes of War. In range attacks, you have shooting arrows in slot 1, shooting arrows in slot 2, rolling attacks, jumping attacks, and Ashes of War. Sorcery and incantations are used by pressing the light attack button with either a staff or equipped for sorceries or a seal equipped for incantations. Note that some sorceries and incantations can be charged, then released to do greater damage, and also some can be cast continuously by holding down the light attack button. Now, some of you might be thinking about going for a bow build, but that's one thing in Elden Ring I would strongly recommend against, especially for new players. Bows can be very difficult to use and master, and their attribute scaling isn't that great either. Bows are capable of beating Elden Ring, but in most cases you're better off going with either a ranged sorcery or incantation, or simply using a bow to augment your melee abilities rather than it being the focus of your build, as it will be a lot more difficult than a normal build. For those of you that want to go with a tankier build, the next tip I want to talk about is shields and block counters. Using a shield and blocking is a great way to mitigate a lot of damage and prevent otherwise untimely deaths. If you decide to use a shield in Elden Ring, there are a few things to be aware of. Look for shields with high guard boost. Blocking requires stamina, like almost every other ability does in combat. Guard boost is a stat that lowers the stamina cost of blocking. If you try to block and run out of stamina, it will fail and you will be stunned for a second or two and will be vulnerable to being critically attacked. So the higher this stat, the lower stamina you need to block hits. Look for what size the shield is. There are 3 different size shield types in Elden Ring, and those are being small shields, medium shields, and great shields. Different size shields will allow you to deflect different types of attacks. For instance, when using a great shield, most attacks will bounce off your shield and even slightly stagger most enemies, excluding bosses, when it happens. Look for the damage and mitigation numbers on a shield. Shields have a numeric value of how much damage of any given type the shield will protect you from. The numbers are percentage based, so if you see a shield with 100 physical damage mitigation, then that means it will block 100% of physical damage from most attacks as long as you have the stamina for it. Be aware that there are some weapon types that do physical damage that get past your shields, such as scythes or bloodhound's claws. Note that a great starting shield is the brass shield, and that can be farmed from the soldier enemies at the Gatefront Ruins soon after you start the game. It requires 16 strength and it weighs 7 and has 100 physical mitigation. One more thing about that is that in Elden Ring, in order to get a weapon or piece of armor to drop from an enemy, they have to be using it. So when trying to farm the shield, only the soldiers you see using the shield or have the shield equipped will drop it. The others will not. You will also need to pay attention to the weight of the shield. Bigger shields typically offer more protection, but that usually means that they weigh more as well, and balancing your weight can be challenging on its own. Your shield will come with an Ash of War on it. Most of the time that's in the form of some sort of parry, but some have unique shield Ashes of War. The unique ones typically can't be changed for a different one. Ashes of War on shields that can be changed can be valuable, as you can change it to the Ash of War no skill, so that you can continue using the Ash of War on the weapon in your main hand. One mechanic that can be hugely helpful in Elden Ring are block counters. This is where you block with your shield and then immediately press your heavy attack button, which should be R2 for PlayStation or right trigger for Xbox. If you successfully execute one, it will make this sound. The follow-up attack, when you do perform a block counter, can stance break enemies and offer you a chance to get healed up in a hard fight or get in a critical attack for massive damage, often turning the tide in battle. Block counters are so good that there are builds out there dedicated to playing through the entire game just using that mechanic. Do note that if you go for a block counter build, I recommend going for a great shield, as they have the highest guard boost and some of the highest protection in the game, but they weigh a good amount more than light and medium shields, so that's something to keep in mind. No matter what kind of character you build, whether it's melee or ranged, the next tip you need to learn is stance, and it's an important one. Stance is a mechanic in Elden Ring unique to enemies. Think of it as an additional hidden health bar that, once damaged enough, will result in an enemy being stance broken. Once an enemy is stance broken, most of them will do an animation of them kneeling or with them slumped over with a glowing dot on them, which indicates that they can be critically hit. When this happens, approach the glowing spot for enemies that are stance broken. Without the spot, approach the front and press the light attack button. This will perform a critical attack, dealing huge damage. Do note, the invisible stance bar resets at around 6 seconds of not being hit. In other words, if you haven't attacked an enemy for 6 seconds, their stance damage they've taken will have reset. It's best to keep up your attacks if you think an enemy is about to be stance broken. Every attack you do does stance damage. Different attacks have different values, and some attacks do more stance damage than others. Specifically, heavy attacks do a lot more stance damage than light attacks, and charged heavy attacks do even more stance damage than regular heavy attacks. Two-handed charged heavy attacks do more stance damage than those. Each weapon type does a different amount of stance damage as well. For instance, the average stance damage for a charged heavy attack with a dagger type weapon is 16, but the average stance damage for the colossal sword type weapon with the same attack is 40. Additionally, sorceries, incantation, and weapons Ashes of War also do stance damage to varying degrees, so that's something to take into account as well when you make your build. Like block counters, stance damage is another way to build your character, only stance break builds tend to be more on the offensive side while block counter builds tend to be on the defensive side. That being said, stance break builds can be some of the best in the game. The last thing I want to talk about is whether to try to parry. Parrying, to parry or not to parry. So parrying in Elden Ring is ridiculously powerful in the right hands. It's one of those mechanics that is easy to attempt but difficult to master. You have to equip a weapon or shield with the Ash of War parry and then press your Ash of War at the right time. I hear a lot of people say that you can press it when the enemy's hand starts to move to attack you. I've heard others say it's when the weapon starts to move. One thing I can tell you that it definitely takes practice to get good at, and I can also tell you right now that I'm so great at it. Yeah, I'm terrible at it. Other than that last one, hopefully these tips will help you out in your journey through Elden Ring. I think I'm going to do item crafting and room farming in the next video. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And with that being said, I would love a like and a sub, and I will see you in the next video. See ya.